The alarm went off at 6:30, just like it did every morning. David hit the snooze button twice before finally dragging himself out of bed. His bedroom was dark, the curtains still drawn shut from the night before. He sat on the edge of the mattress for a moment, rubbing his face with both hands, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had become his constant companion lately. 42 years old, and he felt like he was carrying the weight of the entire world on his shoulders. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man who hadn't been sleeping well. Dark circles under his eyes, hair that was graying faster than he wanted to admit, and a tiredness that went deeper than just physical fatigue. He splashed cold water on his face, hoping it would help him feel more awake. It didn't really work, but he went through the motions anyway. Downstairs in the kitchen, David started the coffee maker and stared at it while it gurgled and hissed, like watching it would somehow make it brew faster. The house was too quiet. It had been 3 years since his wife passed away from cancer, and he still hadn't gotten used to the silence. Sometimes he would catch himself about to call out to her, asking if she wanted coffee too, before reality would hit him all over again. He lived alone now in their suburban home, a nice 3-bedroom place with a backyard that he barely looked at anymore. The grass needed cutting, he noticed through the kitchen window, but he couldn't bring himself to care. There were more important things to worry about right now. Much more important things. His laptop was already open on the kitchen table from the night before, displaying spreadsheets and financial reports that made his stomach turn. David was an architect, had his own firm with 2 partners and a team of 7 employees who depended on him. And right now that firm was in serious trouble. The numbers on the screen didn't lie. They were running out of money, projects were drying up, and he was going to have to make some very difficult decisions very soon. He sat down with his coffee, the steam rising up and fogging his glasses slightly. His finger hovered over the mouse, not wanting to click and see the updated numbers from yesterday. Maybe if he didn't look, the problem would somehow solve itself, but that wasn't how life worked, and he knew it. With a deep breath, he opened the file and started reviewing everything again. Even though he had practically memorized every number by now, lost in the sea of red figures and declining projections, he barely heard the soft knock at the back door. It was exactly 8 o'clock. Right on time, just like always. Rosa let herself in with the key he had given her months ago. She was his housekeeper, came twice a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays to clean the house. She had been working for him for about 8 months now, ever since his sister had insisted that he needed help keeping the place livable. At first, David had resisted. He didn't want a stranger in his home, going through his things, seeing how he lived. But eventually he had given in, and Rosa had shown up that first day with her cleaning supplies and a gentle smile. She was probably in her late 50s, with kind eyes and silver streaks running through her dark hair that she always kept pulled back in a neat bun. Rosa spoke limited English, communicating mostly through gestures and simple phrases, but she was incredibly good at her job. The house had never been cleaner, more organized, or better maintained. She moved through the rooms like a quiet ghost, efficient and thorough, never asking for anything extra, never complaining. "Good morning, Mr. David," she said softly as she came in, carrying her bag of supplies. "Morning, Rosa," he mumbled, not looking up from his laptop screen. He heard her footsteps move through the kitchen, heard the soft sound of her putting her things down in the laundry room, heard the familiar routine beginning, but he didn't really pay attention. His mind was elsewhere, trapped in calculations and worst-case scenarios. Rosa moved upstairs to start cleaning the bedrooms, and David poured himself another cup of coffee. His third already, and it wasn't even 9 in the morning yet. The caffeine wasn't helping him focus anymore. If anything, it just made him more anxious, more aware of how bad things really were. He pulled up another document, this one containing the names of all his employees. 7 people who had families, mortgages, car payments, lives that depended on their paychecks. How was he supposed to choose who to let go? How could he look any of them in the eye and tell them they no longer had a job? Some of them had been with the firm since the beginning, had helped build it from nothing into something successful, and now he might have to destroy their livelihoods because he couldn't keep the business afloat. The thought made him feel sick. He pushed the laptop away and stood up, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. Maybe he should sell the house. Maybe he should take out a bigger loan. Maybe he should just give up and close the firm entirely, save everyone the prolonged agony of watching it slowly die. Through the ceiling, He could hear the soft sounds of Rosa working, the vacuum cleaner humming, footsteps moving from room to room, the occasional clink of something being set down. It was a comforting sound in a way, knowing someone else was there even if they weren't really interacting. The house felt less empty when she was around, less like a tomb of memories. David realized he had never really talked to Rosa beyond basic pleasantries. "Good morning, see you Saturday, thank you, here's your payment." 8 months she had been coming to his home, and he knew almost nothing about her. Where did she live? Did she have family? What was her story? He had been so wrapped up in his own grief and problems that he had never thought to ask, but today wasn't the day to start. Today, he needed to figure out how to save his company or accept that he couldn't. Everything else was just background noise. He sat back down at the table and forced himself to look at the numbers again. There had to be a solution somewhere. There had to be something he was missing, some option he hadn't considered yet. He just needed to think harder, work smarter, find the answer that was surely hiding in all this data. Hours passed without him noticing. Rosa continued her work upstairs, and David continued his work downstairs. 2 people in the same house but existing in completely separate worlds. The morning sun grew brighter, streaming through the windows and warming the kitchen, but David didn't feel it. He was too cold inside, frozen by the fear of failure and the weight of responsibility. Around 10:30, he heard Rosa's footsteps coming down the stairs. Usually this meant she was done with the upstairs and moving on to the living room and dining area. He didn't look up. His eyes were burning from staring at the screen for so long, and his shoulders were tight with tension. Another cup of coffee sat cold and untouched beside him. What David didn't know was that his entire world was about to change. That this Wednesday morning, which had started like every other Wednesday morning, was not going to be regular at all. That sometimes the people we barely notice are carrying stories that could transform everything. That the answer to his problems might not be in spreadsheets and calculations, but in the quiet woman moving through his house with a dust cloth and a heart full of memories. But for now, in this moment, he was just a tired man trying to hold his life together, completely unaware that everything was about to shift. David needed to stretch his legs. His back was aching from hunching over the laptop for hours, and his eyes felt like sandpaper. He decided to go upstairs to grab some files from his home office, hoping the change of scenery might help clear his head. Maybe looking at actual paper documents instead of glowing screens would give him a fresh perspective on the mess his business was in. He climbed the stairs slowly, feeling older than his 42 years. The steps creaked under his feet, familiar sounds in a house he had lived in for over a decade. At the top of the landing, he turned toward his office, but something made him stop. A sound. A soft sound that didn't belong to cleaning or vacuuming or any of the usual noises Rosa made while working. Someone was crying. David froze, unsure what to do. The sound was coming from the hallway just outside the master bedroom. He moved quietly, almost tiptoeing, not wanting to startle whoever it was, though of course he knew it had to be Rosa. There was nobody else in the house. When he rounded the corner, he saw her. Rosa was standing in front of the portrait of his late wife that hung on the hallway wall. Her back was to him, her shoulders shaking slightly, and she was holding one hand up to her face. The cleaning cloth had fallen to the floor beside her feet. David's chest tightened. That portrait had been taken about 5 years ago, before his wife got sick. She was smiling in it, her hair catching the sunlight, her eyes bright and full of life. He usually avoided looking at it directly because it hurt too much, but Rosa was staring at it like she was looking at something that reached deep into her soul. He cleared his throat gently, not wanting to scare her. Rosa jumped and spun around, her eyes wide and wet with tears. When she saw him standing there, her face flushed with embarrassment. She quickly wiped at her cheeks with both hands, trying to erase the evidence of her tears. "I'm sorry, Mr. David," she said, her voice thick with emotion and her accent heavier than usual. "I'm sorry. I go back to work now." She bent down to pick up the cloth, but David held up his hand. "Wait," he said softly. "Rosa, please. Are you okay? What's wrong?" She straightened up, clutching the cloth in both hands like it was a lifeline. Her eyes darted toward the floor, clearly uncomfortable being caught in such a vulnerable moment. "Is nothing," she said quietly. The picture. The lady in the picture." David moved closer, keeping his voice gentle. "That was my wife. She passed away 3 years ago." Rosa nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. David. She was very beautiful. There was something in the way Rosa was looking at the portrait that told David there was more to her tears than just sympathy for his loss. He had seen that look before, in his own reflection during the hardest days after his wife died. It was the look of someone who understood grief from the inside, not just from the outside looking in. Rosa, he said carefully, do you want to sit down for a minute?
Can we talk?
She looked uncertain, like she was afraid she might be crossing some line. In 8 months, they had never had a real conversation beyond basic instructions about the house. But something had shifted in this moment. Something had broken open, and David suddenly realized he wanted to know. He wanted to understand why this quiet woman who cleaned his house was standing in his hallway, crying at a picture of someone she had never met. Please, he added, gesturing toward the small bench seat near the window. Just for a few minutes. Rosa hesitated, then nodded slowly. They both sat down, David leaving a respectful distance between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The house was so quiet that David could hear the ticking of the clock downstairs in the living room. Finally, Rosa took a shaky breath. Your wife, she began, her English slow and careful. She reminds me of someone. My daughter. She would be about the same age. Same smile, maybe. David felt his heart sink. Would be. Past tense wrapped in conditional language. You have a daughter? He asked. I had a daughter, Rosa corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Carmen. She died 15 years ago, in Guatemala. That's where I'm from. The weight of those simple words hung in the air between them. David suddenly felt ashamed. Here he had been, so consumed by his own problems and his own grief. And he had never once thought about what losses Rosa might be carrying around. She came into his home twice a week, cleaned up after him, made his life easier, and disappeared again. And he had never bothered to see her as a whole person with her own story. I'm so sorry, he said. And he meant it. What happened? If you don't mind me asking. Rosa wiped at her eyes again with the back of her hand. She was sick, very sick. We didn't have money for good doctors, good medicine. She was only 23 years old when she died. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she had to stop to compose herself. David felt a lump forming in his own throat. That's terrible. I can't imagine losing a child. I really can't. After she died, Rosa continued, staring at her hands. I couldn't stay in Guatemala. Everything reminded me of her. Every place we had been together, every street, every market. My sister, she has 3 children, Carmen's children. I send them money every month so they can have better life. That's why I came to America, to work, to help them. So Rosa wasn't just his housekeeper. She was a grandmother sending money across borders to raise children who had lost their mother. She was a woman who had left behind everything familiar to build a new life in a country where she barely spoke the language. She was carrying grief that was 15 years old but clearly still as sharp as broken glass. Do you get to see them? David asked. Your grandchildren? Rosa shook her head. Not since I came here. 6 years now. Video calls sometimes, but it's not the same. They're growing up without me, without their mother. Her voice broke completely then, and she put her face in her hands. Without thinking, David reached out and gently touched her shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it was the first real human connection either of them had shared. I'm sorry, Rosa, for all of it. For your daughter, for being apart from your grandchildren, for everything. They sat there together in the quiet hallway. 2 people who had both lost someone they loved more than life itself, who both knew what it meant to wake up every day to an emptiness that never quite went away. The portrait of David's wife looked down at them, frozen in a moment of happiness that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. After a while, Rosa lifted her head and wiped her face one more time. Carmen, my daughter, she loved to draw, she said, a small, sad smile appearing on her face. Always drawing, always with pencil and paper. She would draw buildings, houses, churches. She wanted to study architecture, wanted to design buildings that would help people, but we couldn't afford school. She worked instead, tried to save money, but then she got sick. David felt something shift in his chest. Architecture, his field, the thing he had dedicated his life to. She wanted to be an architect? Rosa nodded. Yes, she was so talented, Mr. David. Even without training, even without school, she could draw beautiful things. She had books she would study from the library. She would look at buildings in the city and sketch them. She had such dreams. Rosa's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. Such big dreams for a girl with no money and no opportunity. Do you have any of her drawings? David asked, genuinely curious now. Rosa looked at him, surprised by the question. Then slowly she nodded. I keep one. Always with me. I carry it everywhere. She reached into the pocket of her work apron and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Her hands were shaking slightly as she opened it and carefully extracted a folded piece of paper from one of the compartments. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, folded and unfolded so many times that the creases were wearing thin. Rosa handled it like it was made of gold and glass. She unfolded it carefully and held it out to David. He took it with the same reverence she had shown, understanding that he was holding something precious and irreplaceable. When he looked at the drawing, his breath caught in his throat. It was a building, a community center of some kind, drawn in pencil with remarkable detail and skill. David stared at the drawing in his hands, unable to look away. The paper was fragile, handled so many times that it felt thin as tissue, but the image on it was remarkably clear. Carmen had drawn a building with incredible attention to detail. It wasn't just a simple sketch. This was architectural planning, even if it was rough and unschooled. The building she had designed was a community center. You could tell from the layout, from the way she had imagined open spaces and gathering areas. There were large windows sketched in to let in natural light, a central courtyard that seemed designed to bring people together, and careful notes written in Spanish along the margins. David's Spanish was rusty, but he could make out some of the words. Words like familia, comunidad, esperanza, family, community, hope. Rosa, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, this is incredible. Your daughter had real talent, genuine talent. Rosa's face lit up with a mixture of pride and sadness. You really think so? I always tell her she was good, but I'm her mother. Of course I think she's good. But you are architect. You know these things. David looked up from the drawing to meet her eyes. I'm not just saying it to be nice. Look at these proportions, the way she thought about space and flow. Most people can't visualize three-dimensional structures like this without training. She had an intuitive understanding of design. He looked back down at the paper, studying it more carefully. See here how she planned for natural ventilation? And these load-bearing walls? She got the concept right even if she didn't know the technical terms. This isn't amateur work. This is someone who had a gift. Tears were streaming down Rosa's face again, but this time they seemed different. Not just tears of grief, but something else mixed in. Relief, maybe. Validation. For 15 years she had carried this drawing, believing in her daughter's dream, but never really knowing if that belief was just a mother's bias or if Carmen truly had been as talented as Rosa thought. She never got to show anyone, Rosa said quietly. No one who would know, who could tell her if she was good enough. She just kept drawing, kept hoping, kept saving money that we never quite had enough of. And then she got sick and there was no more time. David felt something stirring inside him, an idea beginning to form. It was just a whisper of a thought not fully shaped yet, but it was there. He looked at the drawing again, at the way Carmen had imagined a space where people could come together, where families could gather and feel safe, a place for community. Rosa, would you mind if I took a picture of this? He asked. I promise I'll be careful with the original. I'll give it right back to you. But I'd like to have a copy if that's okay. Rosa looked uncertain. Why you want picture? I'm not completely sure yet, David admitted. But something about this is speaking to me. Your daughter's vision, what she was trying to create here. I just want to spend more time with it if you don't mind. Rosa hesitated for a long moment, her finger hovering near the precious paper. This drawing was one of the few things she had left of Carmen, a physical piece of her daughter's dreams and hopes. But something in David's face must have reassured her because she finally nodded. Okay, but please be very careful. I will. I promise. David pulled out his phone and carefully photographed the drawing from several angles, making sure he captured all the details and the notes written in the margins. When he was done, he folded the paper back along its well-worn creases and handed it to Rosa with both hands, treating it with the reverence it deserved. Rosa tucked it carefully back into her wallet, then back into her apron pocket, patting it gently to make sure it was secure. Thank you for looking at it, Mr. David. Thank you for saying nice things about Carmen's work. It means a lot to me. I meant every word, David said. Then after a pause, he added, Rosa, you said Carmen wanted to design buildings that would help people. What did she mean by that? What kind of buildings? Rosa's eyes became distant, remembering. She would say, Mama, too many people have no place to go, no place to be together, no place to feel safe. In our neighborhood in Guatemala, there was nothing. No center for community. No place for children to play that was safe. No place for mothers to meet and help each other. Carmen wanted to design places like that. Places that would make life better for people who don't have much. David felt his heart beating faster. The idea that had been whispering in the back of his mind was getting louder now, taking shape. Did she ever talk about specific things these buildings should have? Programs or services? Oh yes, all the time. Rosa smiled at the memory, and for a moment the grief lifted from her face. She would say they need classrooms where people can learn English, learn skills for jobs, space for children to do homework after school, kitchen where people can cook together, share food. She would say, when people have a place to gather, they become strong together. They help each other. They become real community. David was nodding, his mind racing now. He thought about his struggling architecture firm, about the spreadsheets and declining numbers that had consumed his entire morning. He thought about how empty and meaningless that work had started to feel. Designing office buildings and shopping centers for clients who had plenty of money, but no vision beyond profit margins. And here was this drawing, created by a young woman who never got the chance to go to architecture school, who died before she could see any of her dreams come true. But her vision was clear and pure and focused on something that actually mattered, building something that would help people, that would bring communities together, that would make life better for families who needed it most. Rosa, David said slowly, the idea fully forming now. What if we could build something like this? What if we could take Carmen's vision and make it real? Rosa looked at him like he had started speaking a language she didn't understand. What you mean? I mean, what if my firm designed and built a community center based on your daughter's ideas? A place for immigrant families, people who are new to this country, people who need support and resources and a place to belong. What if we could do that? Rosa's eyes went wide. But Mr. David, that would cost so much money. Who would pay for such a thing? There are grants, David said, speaking faster now as the excitement built in his chest. Non-profit organizations, government programs, foundations that fund community development projects. It's not impossible. It would take work, a lot of work. But it could be done. He stood up, pacing now, the same nervous energy he had felt that morning but channeled in a completely different direction. My firm is struggling right now, Rosa. We've been chasing the wrong projects, working for the wrong reasons. But this could change everything. I don't understand, Rosa said, shaking her head. How could this help your business? David turned to face her. Because it would give us purpose again. It would show people what we're really capable of when we care about something that matters. And yes, it could bring in funding, new clients, partnerships with organizations doing good work. But more than that, he paused, trying to find the right words. More than that, it would mean something. It would honor your daughter's memory. It would turn her dream into something real that helps actual people. Rosa was crying again, but she was also smiling, confused and overwhelmed and not quite believing what she was hearing. You really think this could happen? I don't know, David admitted. But I want to try, if you'll let me. If you'll help me understand what communities like yours really need. Your experience, your insight, that's invaluable. Architecture isn't just about drawing pretty buildings. It's about understanding how people live, what they need, how spaces can make their lives better. And you know things I could never learn from a textbook. Rosa stood up, wringing her hands together. Mr. David, I'm just a housekeeper. I don't know anything about these things. You're not just a housekeeper, David said firmly. You're a mother who raised a daughter with dreams. You're a grandmother supporting children across borders. You're someone who has lived the immigrant experience, who knows what it's like to start over in a new country with nothing. That knowledge is worth more than any degree I have hanging on my wall. They stood there in the hallway, the portrait of David's wife still watching over them, and something fundamental had shifted between these two people. They weren't employer and employee anymore. They were becoming something else. The next few days were a blur. David couldn't stop thinking about Carmen's drawing, about Rosa's story, about the possibility of creating something that actually mattered. He found himself waking up at 5 in the morning, not because of anxiety about failing business numbers, but because his mind was racing with ideas and he couldn't wait to get started. That Saturday, when Rosa came back to clean, David was waiting for her with coffee and a notebook full of sketches and questions. She looked surprised to see him so energized, so different from the exhausted, defeated man who had barely looked up from his laptop just days before. "Rosa, sit down," he said, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. "Forget the cleaning for now. I need your help with something more important." She sat down hesitantly, still not quite comfortable with this new dynamic between them. For 8 months she had been the invisible person who made his house clean, and now suddenly he wanted her input, her ideas, her time. It felt strange and uncomfortable, but also, if she was being honest with herself, it felt good to be seen. David spread out papers across the table. Printouts of Carmen's drawing, his own rough sketches, notes about community centers and their functions, statistics about immigrant populations in their area. "I've been doing research," he explained. "There are about 15,000 immigrant families within a 20-mile radius of here. Most of them are working 2 or 3 jobs, struggling to make ends meet, trying to learn English, trying to help their kids succeed in school. And there's almost no support infrastructure for them." Rosa nodded slowly. "Yes, this is true. Many people in my church, they work so hard but have nowhere to go for help. No one to teach them English. No one to explain how things work in this country. They are lost." "Exactly." David leaned forward, his enthusiasm building. "So what if we created a space that provided all of that? English classes, job training, after-school programs for kids, legal aid clinics, health screenings, everything a family might need to establish themselves here. All in one place, all free or very low cost. That would be wonderful," Rosa said, her eyes starting to shine. "That would change so many lives." "But Mr. David, who will pay for this? To build such a place, to run all these programs, it must cost millions of dollars." "It will cost money, yes," David admitted. "But I've been researching grants and funding sources all week. There are federal programs for community development, state funds for social services, private foundations that support immigrant integration. If we put together a solid proposal showing the need and the impact, we could potentially piece together enough funding to make this happen." Over the next hour, David asked Rosa questions he had never thought to ask before. What did her community really need? What services were missing? What would make the biggest difference in people's lives? And Rosa, once she got over her initial shyness, had answers. So many answers. She told him about mothers who couldn't help their children with homework because they didn't speak English, about fathers who worked construction but didn't know their rights when employers cheated them out of wages, about teenagers who felt caught between 2 cultures, not quite fitting in anywhere, about elderly grandparents who were lonely and isolated because they couldn't communicate with anyone outside their homes. David took notes furiously, his architect's mind already translating these needs into physical spaces. A large classroom area that could be divided for different age groups. A computer lab where people could learn skills and search for jobs. A commercial kitchen for cooking classes and community meals. Quiet study rooms. A play area where parents could watch their children while attending classes. Offices for social workers and legal advisors. "Rosa," he said after she had talked for nearly an hour, "would you be willing to introduce me to people in your community? I need to hear more stories, understand more needs. If we're going to do this right, we can't just guess what people need. We have to actually listen to them." Rosa looked nervous. "You want to meet people from my church? From my neighborhood?" "Yes, if they're willing to talk to me. I know I'm an outsider. I know I don't understand what it's like to be in their situation, but I want to learn. And I think if they see that we're serious about this, that we're not just some charity trying to feel good about ourselves, but actually trying to create something useful, they might be willing to share their experiences." That Sunday, Rosa took David to her church. It was a small building in a part of town he rarely visited, with services in Spanish and a congregation of mostly Central American immigrants. David was the only white face in the room, and at first people looked at him with suspicion and confusion. What was this stranger doing here? But Rosa introduced him, explained who he was and what he wanted to do. She told them about her daughter Carmen, about the drawing she had made all those years ago, about David's idea to turn that vision into reality. And slowly, cautiously, people began to open up. David met a woman named Lucia, who worked night shifts at a hospital but couldn't advance in her career because her English wasn't good enough for the certification exams. He met Miguel, a skilled carpenter who had built beautiful homes in Honduras but couldn't get proper jobs here because he didn't have the right licenses and didn't know how to navigate the system. He met teenagers who translated for their parents at doctor's appointments and parent-teacher conferences, carrying adult responsibilities on their young shoulders. Each conversation broke David's heart a little bit and strengthened his resolve even more. These weren't abstract problems or statistics in a report. These were real people with real struggles, people who worked incredibly hard and just needed some support to build better lives for their families. Over the next 2 weeks, David met with dozens of families. He visited apartment buildings where 3 families shared 2-bedroom units. He saw children doing homework at kitchen tables crowded with dinner preparations because there was nowhere else to study. He heard story after story of people who wanted to succeed but faced barrier after barrier. And through it all, Rosa was by his side, translating, explaining, bridging the gap between his world and theirs. She became more than his guide. She became his partner in this project, his most trusted advisor. The quiet housekeeper who had once moved through his home like a ghost was now speaking up in meetings, sharing her opinions, pushing back when David's ideas didn't quite fit the reality of immigrant life. Meanwhile, David had to face his business partners. He had been so consumed with this new project that he had barely thought about the firm's financial problems. But he couldn't put it off any longer. He needed to pitch this idea to them and hope they would see what he saw. The meeting didn't start well. His 2 partners, Robert and Kevin, looked at him like he had lost his mind when he presented the community center proposal. "Let me get this straight," Robert said, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. "Instead of focusing on landing corporate clients who can actually pay us, you want to design a community center for people who have no money?" "It's not about them paying us directly," David explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's about grants and funding from organizations that support community development. And it's about changing what our firm stands for. We've been chasing the same boring projects as every other architecture firm in the city. This would set us apart." Kevin shook his head. "David, I understand you're going through something. I get that you've been depressed since your wife passed. But we're talking about the survival of this business. We have payroll to meet. We can't afford to chase some feel-good project that might not even get funded." David felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "This isn't about me being depressed. This is about us remembering why we became architects in the first place. Wasn't it because we wanted to create spaces that improved people's lives? When did we become just another firm designing soulless office buildings for the highest bidder?" The room went silent. Robert and Kevin exchanged glances, and David could see them having a wordless conversation. Finally, Robert sighed. "Show us the numbers. Show us realistic funding sources, a timeline, how this actually helps our bottom line. If you can make a solid business case, we'll consider it. But we're not making any commitments until we see real proof this could work." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. David would take it. He spent the next week working harder than he had in years, putting together a comprehensive proposal. He researched every possible grant, every funding source, every partnership opportunity. He created detailed budgets and timelines. He collected letters of support from community leaders, from Rosa's church, from local nonprofits, and in the center of the proposal, he placed a high-resolution image of Carmen's drawing. The dream of a young woman who never got the chance to become an architect, but whose vision was about to transform an entire community. Rosa came over one evening and found him working at his dining room table. Papers spread everywhere. His eyes red from staring at the computer screen for hours. She brought him homemade tamales and insisted he take a break to eat. "You're working too hard," she said, watching him devour the food like he hadn't eaten in days. "You need to take care of yourself." "I'm fine," David said between bites. "I just need to get this proposal perfect. I'm presenting to my partners tomorrow and I need them to say yes." Rosa sat down across from him. "Mr. David, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "And please just call me David, no more Mr." She smiled. "Okay, David, why are you doing this?" "Really? Is it just for the business?" David put down his fork and thought about the question. At first, maybe I told myself it was about saving the firm. But that's not it anymore. He looked at Rosa directly. "Your daughter had a dream that died with her. And my wife had dreams too. Things she wanted to do that she never got the chance to finish because cancer took her too soon. I can't bring either of them back. But maybe I can take Carmen's vision and make it real. 6 months had passed since that Wednesday morning when David had found Rosa crying in his hallway. 6 months that had changed everything. The proposal had worked. After David presented his comprehensive plan to Robert and Kevin, complete with funding sources and community support letters, they had reluctantly agreed to move forward. It hadn't been easy. There were weeks of applications, meetings with grant organizations, presentations to nonprofit boards, and countless revisions to the design plans. But slowly, piece by piece, the funding had come together. A federal community development grant provided the foundation. A state immigrant integration program added more. Private foundations that supported education and social services contributed. Local businesses looking for positive publicity pitched in. It was like assembling a puzzle, each piece important, each one requiring its own pitch and justification. But David had never felt more alive, more purposeful, than during those months of hustling for every dollar. And the firm had transformed too. Word spread about what they were doing. Other nonprofits started reaching out, asking if they could design community spaces, affordable housing, youth centers. The kind of work that actually meant something. Robert and Kevin had been shocked when new clients started calling, drawn by the firm's newfound reputation for socially conscious design. The financial crisis that had been keeping David up at night slowly began to ease. Now, on a bright Saturday morning in early spring, David stood at a construction site wearing a hard hat and work boots, watching as the foundation was poured for the Carmen Martinez Community Center. That's what they were calling it. Rosa had cried for an hour when David told her they wanted to name the building after her daughter. Rosa was there too, standing beside him, also wearing a hard hat that looked almost comical on her small frame. She couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop looking at the construction workers moving around the site, at the blueprints displayed on a board near the entrance, at the sign that read Future Home of the Carmen Martinez Community Center. "I can't believe this is real," she whispered, not for the first time. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it will all be a dream." "It's real," David assured her. "Look, they're pouring concrete. Can't get more real than that." But David had one more surprise for Rosa, something he had been planning for weeks, something he hadn't told her about yet. He checked his watch. Almost time. His heart was beating fast with nervous excitement. "Rosa," he said, "there's someone I want you to meet. Actually, several someones. They should be arriving any minute now." She looked at him confused. "Who?" Before he could answer, he saw a car pulling into the construction site parking area. Then another car behind it. His heart leapt. They had made it. He had been worried about the timing, about whether everything would work out, but here they were. 3 people got out of the cars. A woman who looked to be in her 40s and 2 teenagers, a boy and a girl. They stood uncertainly near their vehicles, looking around at the construction site with wide eyes. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Her entire body went rigid. "No," she breathed. "No, that can't be." "Surprise," David said softly. Rosa started walking, then running, moving faster than David had ever seen her move. "Maria! Carlos, Ana!" She was sobbing, calling out names, her arms outstretched. The woman and the 2 teenagers ran toward her, and they collided in the middle of the construction site in a tangle of embracing arms and tears and incomprehensible words in rapid Spanish. David watched from a distance, his own eyes getting wet. It had taken weeks to arrange. Visas, plane tickets, coordinating schedules. He had worked with an immigration lawyer from one of the nonprofits to make sure everything was legal and proper. Rosa's sister and her 2 grandchildren, Carmen's children, were here in America for the first time, here to see the building that would honor their mother's memory. After what felt like an eternity, Rosa turned back to David, still holding her grandchildren's hands, tears streaming down her face. She didn't have words. She just looked at him with an expression of such pure gratitude and joy that David felt his throat tighten. "They can stay for 2 weeks," he explained, walking over to the family. "I hope that's okay. I know you probably need more time, but that's what we could arrange for now." Rosa let go of her grandchildren and walked straight to David. Before he knew what was happening, she had wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. "Thank you," she sobbed into his shoulder. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't know how to thank you enough. You already thanked me, David said quietly, hugging her back. You gave me a reason to remember why I became an architect. You gave me purpose again. The groundbreaking ceremony happened an hour later. Local news crews had shown up along with representatives from the organizations that had funded the project, community leaders, and dozens of families from Rosa's church. David had prepared a speech, but when he stood in front of the small crowd with a microphone in his hand, he found himself setting aside his notes. A few months ago, he began, his voice carrying across the construction site. I was sitting in my kitchen thinking my life and my business were falling apart. I was so focused on my problems that I barely noticed the woman who came to clean my house twice a week. I didn't know her story. I didn't know about the daughter she had lost or the dreams that daughter had carried. He looked at Rosa, who was standing with her arm around her sister, her grandchildren on either side of her. Rosa's daughter Carmen never got to become an architect. She never got the education or the opportunity to see her dreams become reality. But she had a vision. She drew a picture of a building that would bring people together, that would help families like hers find support and community and hope. David held up a framed copy of Carmen's original drawing. The crowd murmured, people craning their necks to see. This building we're constructing today is based on that drawing. Every design choice, every space we've created, is inspired by Carmen's vision and guided by the voices of this community. This isn't just a building. It's proof that dreams don't die even when the dreamer does. It's proof that one person's vision can touch hundreds of lives, even if that person never got to see it happen. He paused, collecting himself. In a year, this center will open its doors. There will be English classes here, job training, after-school programs, legal clinics, health services, and a place for families to gather and support each other. But more than that, there will be hope here. Hope that was born from loss, from grief, from a mother's love for her daughter and a daughter's dream for her community. The crowd erupted in applause. Rosa was crying again, but so were many other people. David saw grown men wiping their eyes, mothers clutching their children close, teenagers looking at the construction site with something like wonder in their faces. After the ceremony, as people milled around eating food from a taco truck David had hired for the event, Rosa's granddaughter Anna approached him shyly. She was 16, with her grandmother's kind eyes and something else, something that reminded David of the intelligence and creativity that must have been Carmen's. Mr. David, she said in careful English, my grandmother tells me you are an architect, that you design buildings. That's right, David said, smiling at her. I think maybe I want to be an architect too, Anna said, glancing at her grandmother. Like my mother wanted to be. Is that crazy? David felt his heart swell. It's not crazy at all. It's actually the best thing I've heard in a long time. But I don't know if we can afford school. Anna continued, her face falling. My grandmother sends us money, but it's not enough for university. Especially not in America. David exchanged a glance with Rosa, then looked back at Anna. What if I told you that we're starting a scholarship fund? It's called the Carmen Martinez Scholarship, and it's for young people from immigrant families who want to study architecture or design. The first scholarship will be awarded next year. Anna's eyes went wide. Really? A scholarship named after my mother? Really, David confirmed. Your mother's dream doesn't end with this building. We want to help other young people pursue the same dream she had. Maybe you could be one of them. Anna threw her arms around David, hugging him tightly. Over her shoulder, David saw Rosa watching them, her hands clasped together like she was praying, tears still flowing down her cheeks but her face radiant with joy. As the sun began to set that evening, David found himself standing alone at the construction site after everyone had left. He looked at the foundation that had been poured that morning, trying to imagine what this space would look like in a year. Classrooms full of students learning English, children playing safely while their parents attended job training, families gathering for meals and celebrations, a community coming together in a space designed with love and purpose. He thought about that Wednesday morning 6 months ago, when he had been so consumed by his own problems that he barely noticed the woman crying in his hallway. He thought about how a single moment of paying attention, of actually seeing another person, had changed everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Rosa. It was a photo of her sitting with her sister and grandchildren in his living room, all of them squeezed together on the couch, smiling at the camera. The text below read simply, "Thank you for everything. You gave me back my family and my daughter's dream. You are my guardian angel." David smiled, tears blurring his vision. He typed back, "You saved me too, Rosa, more than you'll ever know." As he walked to his car, David realized he wasn't the same man who had sat at his kitchen table 6 months ago, drowning in spreadsheets and despair. Rosa wasn't just his housekeeper anymore. She was his friend, his partner, his teacher. She had shown him that the most important things in life aren't found in profit margins or business success. They're found in connection, in purpose, in taking the time to see and hear the people around us. Sometimes the most ordinary day can become extraordinary. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who change our lives. And sometimes, when we're brave enough to turn our pain into purpose, we discover that we can honor those we've lost by helping those who are still here, still dreaming, still hoping for a better tomorrow. The Carmen Martinez Community Center would open its doors in a year, but the real transformation had already happened. On a quiet Wednesday morning when two people who thought they had nothing in common discovered they both understood loss, and together, they turned that loss into something beautiful,